there's been an uptick in people at homes wanting to have golf greens at home. They will say, "Hey, I want to have a golf green at home. I want to. Things gonna be awesome." So for someone that does that for a living, that maintains courses, maintains greens, repairs greens, what is someone signing up for if they decide they want to have a golf green at home? And if they decide they really want to do that, how would you go about taking a portion of your lawn and turning it into a green?
So if you want to do a green high to cut, that's an everyday thing. You got to mow it every day. You got to top dress it every other week. It needs to be on a every other week preventative fungicide program. It needs to be on a special spoon feeding program. It needs to be on a special micronutrient spoon feeding program. It is an everyday. Once it's in, I'm not talking about actually getting it installed and doing the actual growing for it. If you're doing Bermuda or bent grass, and bent grass, trust me, we have bald spots on the greens. The sun has to align just correct. The moisture has to be just correct to get the bent grass seed to grow. And that's when you're trying to grow it in while you're mowing it at 1/100 of an inch. So wow. I would say it is a lot of work. If you got the time, you could probably do it. But if you're one of the guys where you're like, oh, I can maybe do it, and if I forget about it for a couple days, I'll just get back to it. No luck.
Not for you. Yeah, and I figured that too, because I see some of the greens on YouTube and on some YouTubers, and I say, it's if I'm going to do it, I know how I'd want it to look. And to your point, it's funny. I was speaking to a rep. He was I think he's from Helena. It's like an ag company around here. And he said, Ron, it's funny. People always say, he watched my content too. He says, Ron, people always say the lower you go, the more you have to mow. He says, that's actually not true. He says, the lower you go, the more you have to do. Meaning mowing is one thing, but like to your point, fungicide, specialized fertilizer program, everything. Because mainly it's because you're trying to make the grass do something that I'm guessing innately it doesn't want to do. Like grass doesn't want to be cut that short, live that short, and that's why you have more disease problems potentially. Why you haven't used fungicides.
Yeah, exactly. It's just another layer of stress that it's not used to, and you have to combat with agronomic and culture practices to keep it going. If you've got the time, then go for it. But you also need the machine to do it. It needs to be set to the proper height of cut. And when you're cutting greens, like your blades have to be sharp all the time. Like you can't get away with sharpening your bed knives in a reel once a year, like I'm planning to do when I do our 3/4 of an inch. Like our mechanic, it's every other week he's sharpening our greens blades, because it has to be so tight and so precise, or you're shredding stuff. And then if you're not on top of your disease prevention, there's all those open holes and disease will jump right in. Or it's a lot of work that I don't think a lot of people really realize. I mean, it's definitely plausible if you have the time to do it, but it's just there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it.
Are there certain grass types that are easier to establish as a green than others, you would say? Or
I would say probably for you guys being down in the South, probably like hybrid Bermudas would probably be the best. And I think Tifways, I think are one of them, which a lot of people use down there.
They have like an ultra dwarf Bermuda.
Ultra dwarf, yeah, yep. And then up in our neck of the woods, like POA, which you guys hate POA.
Oh, we kill POA.
There's POA. Like the greens at Shinnecock, those are 100% POA. Like a lot of greens out east are 100% POA. Or like bent grass greens.
And you can cut POA that short; it tolerates it just fine, no problems at all, really. Or
yep, but that's another thing. If you have POA, then you got to worry about seed. Do you want seed heads on your green? Because it's going to go to seed head at a certain point in the year. We even at our course, why we have POA, we spray Proxy, 2 Proxy apps in the spring, 1 Proxy app in the fall, in conjunction with our POA Cure apps, which is a growth regulator to inhibit the formation of seed head. Golfers don't want to putt on seed heads because they're bumpy. The undulation of the greens, it changes the roll of the green. So that's another thing. I mean, if that's a big thing to you, if you don't want to look at seed heads on your greens, I mean, you'll get them in, if you don't apply that stuff, you'll get them early in the spring, you'll get them in midsummer when it starts getting hot, because that's their defense. They're like, this is horrible. I want to kill myself and promote new growth because this is awful. And then in the fall time, when they start to go dormant, they're like, all right, well, this is the end of our life cycle. We need to start making the new generation. Yeah. Wow. And unfortunately, a lot of the new cultivars, or not new cultivars, the cultivars that exist in putting greens aren't, they don't actually create seed head. They just do the flower. They're sterile is the word I'm looking for. So it just ruins the putting surface. So that's another thing you got to think about.
That's true. So it's not even regenerative. It just makes a big mess. And then, so in that case, if you're using like bent grass, you end up having to overseed like what you guys do. You having to.
Yep. And they're so obnoxious because POA is we joke in the turf industry. The last two things on this planet, if everything disappeared, would be cockroaches and POA. It'd be the last two things that would exist on this planet. Right. You can mow them at 100th of an inch, 0.15 inches, and or 0.100, and they'll set the seed heads below your cutting height, and they're like, oh, "Okay, no problem. You're gonna mow this low, then we don't care. We'll just our seed heads will be below your cutting height."
Right. So it's designed to survive. Yeah. So it's interesting. So there you go, guys. So if you're interested in doing a green, if you have the time, by all means, but know that it's not just putting the sand in and cutting it really short. It's the equipment. It's a fungicide program, or herbicide. I don't. You can say herbicide program, but there's a lot that goes into it, and you have to really ask yourself if the juice is worth the squeeze. If
top dressing every other week.
Top dressing every other week. So why is top dressing every other week? Why is that? Because that's one thing I didn't consider. Why is the top dressing every other week required to keep it firm?
So to keep it firm, hybrid Bermudas like Ultra Dwarf and Bentgrass, they are really big thatch creators. So verticutting too, that's another thing you got to do to keep that down in conjunction with your top dressing. Usually when we top dress, we're also verticutting that same week. So we'll verticut, clean the greens, top dress, drag them in. So just to keep that thatch management down too, because if it gets too spongy, then you got disease problems, because disease likes thatch, so you got to keep that down. And then on a playability standpoint, you don't want a green that's like hitting into a sponge.